Welcome to Morning Devotion with Ken Gurley. Devotions designed to inspire you on your daily walk with God. Here's your host, Ken Gurley.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Morning Devotion. Thank you for being a part of this special day. In an unusual season, a difficult season, Friday, December 4th, so much concern, so much pain, so much division, so much dissension, dissolution, heartache. Yeah, your presence, your care, your prayers, one for another. They're making the difference in the lives of so many. So thank you for being here, each and every one of you. Jenny, Anita, Diane, Tristan, Johnny, thank you. Thank you for saying we're going to get together and we're going to see some good things happen in our midst. I believe we're walking through difficult times, and it would be easy for me to just carry on with thoughts that may or may not relate to the time in which we live. But I believe every child of God, we're framed by the day in which we live. We've hit some challenging subjects this week. We've talked about our position at the close of the year, talked about ongoing storms, talked about finishing strong, the temptations, perseverance, things that stop us. This thought, though, today has been on my heart all week, and actually it's been on my thoughts for many weeks and months. It's a thought that has concerned me, troubled me, and I want to challenge you with this today. And I believe this is a great close. Now, I will say this: if it has merit, pray about it, share it with others, encourage people to follow the page, like the page. If it has no merit in your mind, just be cautious in letting it go. This was brought recently to the surface of my attention again by a family member when they asked, where was the church when Roe v. Wade was passed in 1973? Where was the church? Why was the church silent when the Supreme Court created the right of taking an unborn life? It's been a thought I've wrestled with for years. I've participated in marches, prayer events, and things dedicated to restore the sanctity of life. I've helped fund adoption places, home for unwed mothers. I just didn't have the language then to say what I felt, and I don't believe the church had the language to say what we felt. The words just weren't there. In writing the book on prayer, the thought kept surfacing in my mind, and I just couldn't find a place for it in the book, but it refused to be tamed. And so it seems to want to stand alone on this Friday, and stand alone it shall. And if you would allow me, I want to discuss, sing a little louder, the shocking indifference of Christian America. Thank you for being a part of this. Davin and Darlene and Scott and Joe, thank you. Thank you for being a part of this today. Share this with others, and may God do something. I speak not knowing how much longer I will even have the freedom to speak like this. Our attention the past week or two has been on the consequence of elections. The present president named 3 justices to the U.S. Supreme Court, all 3 united recently in majority decisions last week, this week, involving freedom of religion in New York and California. 5-4 decisions. But back in 1973, there was a 7-2 decision, the Roe v. Wade decision, legitimizing the taking of unborn life. It began right here in Texas. It was a Texas case, Roe v. Wade. Norma McCorvey, known by the eponymous Jane Roe, and then versus Henry Wade, who was the Dallas County District Attorney, Roe v. Wade, she claimed that Roe was denied her equal protection under the 14th Amendment. Now, the 14th Amendment, you may remember, was one of the 3 amendments passed post-Civil War. It was passed during Reconstruction. It was designed to make certain that former slaves had freedom and their full rights. Roe v. Wade argued that the Texas abortion law prohibiting abortions was unconstitutional, claiming the freedom found in, yes, that 14th Amendment. I guess somehow in their mind, in a convoluted way, motherhood was a form of slavery, and a woman should be free to end the life of the unborn. Yeah, that's a difficult subject, folks. On January 22, 1973, the Supreme Court said yes. 14th Amendment applies, and the Texas law against abortion was rendered unconstitutional, a 7-2 decision. Now, I want you to stop and think about that the religious freedom cases in the past 2 weeks barely passed 5-4. But abortion was declared legal nearly 50 years ago by a margin of 7-2. You have to understand how shocking it was at the time. No historical event stands in isolation. It's connected to its context in history, just as you and I are in this day we're living in. This decision was framed by the bookends of some of the greatest social upheavals in our nation history, coming through the tumultuous 60s, the Vietnam War protests, civil rights movements, the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Robert F. Kennedy, social norms and mores being overthrown, the so-called Summer of Love, Sex and the Single Girl, that book was released, the large-scale drug use that was seen in that time. Until then, in the 1950s, pretty much every state outlawed abortion except to save the life of the mother. They began loosening in the 60s, but even then, at the end of the 60s, there was only a handful of states that allowed it. And even those had severe restrictions. New York State, the Empire State, was a late comer to this. It became the sixth state to sanction abortion in 1970. Yeah, 50 years ago. President Nixon was in office. He'd just been recently elected by a landslide, but the Watergate scandal was already in full swing. So when Roe v. Wade was announced, there was a war-weary, exhausted majority of Americans said, "What? What was this?" And then moved on. It caught Christian America completely off guard. And I'm going to be frank with you. I'll be very frank with you today. When I review statements made by Christian leaders during that time, I'm appalled and I'm shocked. There just seemed to be a sense of unreality to it all. To those who had not come through the 60s and early 70s, that may seem a little bit unfair, but what 2020 has been in a year, the 60s were in a decade. It was one hit after another, and a nation was being torn apart. We've been here before, folks. The U.S. Catholic bishops were fighting against it, but many so-called evangelical leaders and groups were just initially missing, and so is often the case. Many people of faith just stuck their heads in the sand. We get lost in theological debates. We get lost in our searchings, and we tend to ignore what's going on around us. There actually seemed to be disagreement in Christian camps on when did life really begin. And articles and lectures on whether an unborn child was really a soul, had a soul, was life, had life or not. Even prominent church organizations, even conservative voices, it would really shock you if you went back and reviewed some of the statements made then. They had called prior to Roe v. Wade for Christians to work for legislation to permit such abortions. It just seemed that nobody fathomed, no one understood that tens of millions of unborn lives would be taken in this nation in the next few decades. They realized it too late. And by the late 70s, early 80s, voices began to appear on the scene. And so began the slow march toward curbing this practice. But what was noticed, and this is what I really want to camp out on. It was the phenomena noted in the song, "And the Band Played On." That song, that waltz, was written in 1895 here in America. And we don't remember too many of the verses. We remember the chorus. We remember the title. The chorus said, "Casey would waltz with a strawberry blonde, and the band played on. He'd glide across the floor with the girl he adored, and the band played on." From that song came its phrase and its title that would come to mean studied indifference in the time of upheaval. The phrase would be used of the world to describe a world refusing to face the ramification of the HIV/AIDS crisis. It was used to describe the band playing on the Titanic, those 8 musicians, the sinking ship, the fires, people fighting for their lives, and 8 musicians played a variant sort of tunes. The last one remembered was Nearer My God to Thee. The band played then to calm fears, and their act was one of courage. Nothing wrong with worship, nothing wrong with singing, nothing wrong with music, everything right about it. We are commanded to do that in the Bible, but too many times the band will play on, and it speaks of negligence, and it speaks of preoccupation, and worse yet, it speaks of that awful crime of human nature: indifference, apathy, lethargy. It's been on my mind of late. The silence of Christian America is seen curiously again and again, not just in the face of Roe v. Wade, but at other times. While it was the stirring cries of the New England pulpit that led to the American Revolution, the church's voice was somewhat muzzled for the 77 years between Revolution and Civil War. There were Christians on both sides of the conflict over slavery. Deep chasms were formed in church groups that have not been resolved to this day. It seems that Christian America is more apt to just be silent and to view its forbearance and patience as a quality to be desired, and not to lift our voices as a trumpet. It was Edmund Burke who once said the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing, to sit idly by and to watch a nation plummet into an abyss. And the band played on. You may remember when General George Patton helped deliver the Nazi concentration camps in World War II. He rounded up all the so-called good people who lived near the camps. He marched them through the camps where they could witness the horrible treachery, where they could experience with their eyes, their ears, their noses, what deplorable things had been done in their neighborhood. Yet these so-called good people had never lifted their voices. They had never turned a hand to help, never cried out in alarm for fear of their own safety and skin. Peace in my time. That was Hezekiah's cry. And it's the cry of Christians down through the ages. Indifference, apathy, preoccupied with our lives. Maybe you've heard the story Sing a Little Louder. It's a true story about a small church located along the train tracks in Germany. When those cattle cars would go by, cattle cars loaded with human beings en route to Dachau and Auschwitz, when the pitiful cries of the people on their way to at best inhumane treatment and at worst death, the babies cried, the poor men cried, the women sighed and groaned, they begged for help. The people inside the church could not bear to hear those cries, so they just sang a little louder. A true story written by a man on up in years, remembering the time when he sat on pews, still disturbed by his own indifference, haunted by the memory that when faced with unspeakable evil, the church's first response was to sing a little louder. Oh, Christian America, how can we just sing a little louder, get wrapped up in our own comfort zones, and refuse to get out? We sing about the cross inside the walls, but we refuse to take up the cross outside the walls. We believe lies like, well, I'm okay, you're okay. Can't we just all get along? But Paul said, what concord hath Christ with Belial? What fellowship hath light with darkness? This go along, get along pragmatism is marginalizing and neutralizing the church. We're on the other side of the tracks singing our songs, ignoring what's happening around us. Another quote by Edmund Burke: nothing is so fatal to religion as indifference. By the way, it was Burke. It was Burke who pushed that nobody could sit in the House of the Commons if they traded in slaves. It was Burke who stood on the floor of the House of Commons and pushed for the British to reconsider its opposition to America. It was Burke who argued for India and the people of India and its rights and its freedom. He put his money, he put his life, he put his credibility, he lent his character, his influence, his reputation. He put it all on the line for his beliefs. Nothing is so fatal to religion as indifference. Where are we today? Where are we today? Elie Wiesel's a Holocaust survivor. He wrote the best-selling book about his experiences. It was simply called Night. He won the Nobel Peace Prize. His entire life he fought against oppression and genocide. His enemy was never the Third Reich. It was not the oppressive regimes around the world. Elie Wiesel said his self-declared enemy was indifference. Indifference on the part of good people. Wiesel said the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. He wrote, we must always take side. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Indifference is always the friend of the enemy, never his victim, whose pain is magnified when he or she feels forgotten. That silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. There may be times that we are powerless to prevent injustice, Wiesel wrote, but there must never be a time when we fail to protest. Yes, we may not have the strength, we may not have the numbers, we may not have the clout and the money and the might to go up against billionaires who are dominating the landscape in this world. We may be powerless to prevent a lot of injustice, but there must never be a time, Church of the Living God, that we don't fail to stand up and protest and lift our voices. It was several years before the church finally reacted to Roe v. Wade. One of the first notable nationwide attempts was called the Hyde Amendment, named after a congressman in Illinois. He put forward a bill saying that no federal funds in our nation would be used for the payments of abortion until that time they had. That was 1976. In 1980, the Hyde Amendment was upheld by the Supreme Court. And so for 40 years, we've lived with that no tax dollars can be used to take unborn life. In the Mexico City policy, the same thing. It can't be used overseas for the same federal assistance overseas. The present president wants that Hyde Amendment codified into law. He's the first sitting president to attend and speak at a March to Life rally. His opponents promised to repeal the Hyde Amendment to fund Planned Parenthood with your tax dollars, to provide abortions in America with your tax dollars. And he wants to do it on day one. So next month, can I ask you something? If we wake up one morning and we hear that our tax dollars are being given to Planned Parenthood to fund the ending of unborn life, what will we do then? Will we just sing a little louder? Let the band play on? Gather inside of our four walls? Will we be as the Levite and priest on that Jericho road and just march by on the other side of the road, preoccupied and indifferent? Will we just be silent as the world plunges into ever deepening immorality? I think not, because there's no neutrality. Hear me carefully. No neutrality in the struggle against light and darkness. You and I have to choose sides. We have to lift our voices. And you remember the admonition found in Ezekiel 33, if the watchman sees danger coming, blows the trumpet, the people may or may not respond. It's like the smoke alarm going off in a building. People hear the sound, but sometimes ignore the sound. But if the watchman made the noise, he sounded the alarm, then he's righteous and innocent. But Ezekiel said, if the watchman sees the danger and remains silent, doesn't warn the people, and people are hurt, God says that watchman is going to be responsible. Church, to be silent now is shocking. In a day and an age where the righteous have got to stand up, and the righteous must be counted. Your voice is needed now. It's not needed with the latest conspiracy theory about this and that. It's needed to stand up for truth and righteousness. You be the media. If you don't trust the media, be the media to our day. Don't trust those biased voices telling us to muzzle it, be quiet. We need to lift our voices, speak truth, speak it in love. But above all, speak it. Don't just sing a little louder. Get outside of those four walls and be the salt and the light in your world. Make a difference. Don't go along to get along. Don't just get in a corner church and just say, well, I'm just one voice. What can I do? The power of one person, the power of one voice. There's enough people right now in this morning devotion and with those that you can influence and those you can share this with, that you and I can make a difference in our city, in our state, in our nation, and in the world. We cannot be pulverized and shocked into indifference. We can't be paralyzed and perplexed that we get lost in our little corners of conspiracies. We've got to rise up and say, let the church be the church and let the righteous speak out. Let there be a certain sound. Blow the trumpet in Zion. Sound the alarm. I want to close with a story. It's a true story. Anyone of age on this devotion can well remember where you were when you heard the news of 9/11. Maybe those a little older, you can even remember where you were when the news came out that President Kennedy had been assassinated. David Lodge was a British novelist. He remembers where he was. He'd written a play, a review, and it was being performed. He was in the audience of a theater, and in the play, a character demonstrated his nonchalance by what was happening by pulling out a transistor radio and just turning it on to a random station. It just so happened when he turned it on, when that character in the play turned on the radio, it was a breaking news announcement broadcast to the entire theater that President Kennedy had been shot. Reality had intruded on comedy. The actor switched off the radio as fast as he could, but it was too late. The party was over. I hear the reverberation of a last day train coming down the rail lines. There are many captive souls headed to their eternal destiny. This is no time to hide ourselves away and to sing a little louder. This is a time that reality has invaded religion. We must lift our voices, not in songs, but in laments, not in whispering platitudes, but in urgent warnings, that in his loving kindness, God is reaching to a world that is headed to destruction. We can't save everyone, folks, but let's save some. We'll not be judged by those who ignore our voices, but we will be judged if we fail to lift our voices. This is a day. This is a moment as never before. I'm calling on each of us. I'm speaking to myself because left to my own devices, I could speak encouraging words from now until I don't have a breath to speak anymore. But I will be judged for the words that I speak. And I want to right now just raise a 4-alarm fire and say, church, we have got to rise up and we've got to speak out as never before. I know everything in us wants to go and hide, but stand up. Stand up on the mountainside. Lift your voice like a trumpet and let God use you during this day. I don't want to sing a little louder. I just don't want to gather with us four and no more and pat one another on the back. No, I believe that you and I were called into this generation and were born for this generation. Lift your voices. If this has any merit, if this resonates with anything in your soul, if this touches a chord and it just reverberates and you've been saying, that's what I wanted to vocalize and that's what I wanted to say and I just couldn't find the language, then I urge you, lift your own voice. Share this with as many people as possible. I believe it's not too late for America to see that one final awakening. But it's going to take the church as never before, rising up and lifting our voices. Thank you. Thank you for being a part of this Friday. May God be with you through the weekend. I do look forward to seeing you again Monday morning. Share this, and may God see you through an extraordinary weekend. Amen.
Thank you for listening to Morning Devotion with Ken Gurley. Join us next time for another inspiring devotion. To support this ministry, please visit firstchurch.com/.